Dems and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Welcome, everyone, to this podcast, which is called Rattled Dems. And we do have another dumbest bill in America. First up, the Rattled Dems. We have a great article, podcast listeners, in The Hill magazine, where Biden setbacks rattle Democrats facing tough elections. Now, we've read pieces like this before, but I think you'll appreciate one of the reasons why Democrats are being rattled. It's not necessarily what you would think. So the article reads, Democrats facing tough re-election bids in the House and Senate are grappling with what to tell their constituents about the party's failure to advance major pieces of President Biden's agenda as they head to their home states and districts for the holidays. Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat, West Virginia, effectively killed President Biden's Build Back Broke plan on Sunday when he said he would not support the mammoth social spending legislation. The move sparked outrage from moderates and progressives alike, which shows you, by the way, podcast listeners, there are no moderate Democrats, because if you were a moderate Democrat, you would never support Build Back Better. Representative Abigail Spanberger, Democrat of Virginia, who is one of the most vulnerable House Democrats facing re-election next year, called Manchin's move unacceptable in a statement. Quote, "We cannot act like this moment is the end. Children, families, and the future of our planet are counting on us. In the weeks and months ahead, I will keep working to deliver these meaningful investments to the people of Virginia," Spanberger said, citing the legislation's child tax credit and efforts to combat climate change and lower prescription drug costs. Both wings of the party know they'll likely face questions at the end of the first year of total Democrat control in Washington about what they still couldn't pass and why they couldn't still pass a massive climate and social spending bill and major voting rights legislation. So, before we go on with this article, the Democrats are rattled who are in swing districts because they couldn't pass more inflationary legislation. They couldn't pass more legislation that interferes with your private life. They couldn't pass that legislation, and that's the reason they're rattled. They think they will lose because Democrats won't be motivated to vote for them because they couldn't get this last Build Back Broke bill passed. It's absurd. They're not getting it. They're not getting the fact that if you are a Democrat and you're living in Virginia, let's say in Abigail Spanberger's district, and you go to the grocery store and things cost a lot and gas costs a lot more than it ever has, and everything costs more than it ever has, you don't care what kind of bill is passed because you're just trying to live today. And it's kind of fascinating that these Democrats are rattled because of the fact that they haven't been able to pass major voting rights legislation, as if in the United States of America, you don't have the right to vote if you are an American citizen. Of course you have the right to vote, but no, it's voting rights. You already have the voting rights. Give me a break. A Morning Consult Politico National Tracking Survey released on Monday found that 41% of respondents said Democrats in Congress had accomplished less than expected, while 32% said the party had accomplished about what they expected. The developments over Build Back Better come as Democrats face increasing headwinds going into the midterms, particularly in the House, where the party is experiencing a slew of retirements. Representative Stephanie Murphy, a Democrat of Florida, and Lucille Roybal Allard, Democrat of California, The powerful chairwoman of the Appropriations Subcommittee handling immigration issues both announced on Monday they would not seek re-election in the new year, while the New Jersey Globe reported on Sunday that Representative Albio Sires, Democrat New Jersey, will not seek re-election as well. This is an excellent opportunity for us to reset the conversation and quit talking about process and focus on what really matters, what we want to deliver for people, how that connects with their values and makes their life better. They should have said lives, but it was reading life, said Kelly Dietrich, the founder and CEO of the National Democrat Training Committee. Training little socialists and Marxists. Democrats say that despite not passing Build Back Broke, lawmakers must continue messaging on the party's victories, passing the American Rescue Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure package this year. House Democrats delivered a historic economic recovery that's created 6 million jobs and made a once-in-a-century investment in our infrastructure that will put millions of Americans to work, said Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee spokesman Chris Taylor. Yeah, so the Democrats in the House think that they have created 6 million jobs. So podcast listeners, do you really think the Democrats have made 6 million jobs? I think that the 6 million jobs that have come back to the United States of America have done so because people have gone back to work. Obviously, not enough people and not all people, but enough people have gone back to work so that you have created 6 million jobs. Well, they were already there. It's just they went back. But according to the Democrats, the government, created the jobs. And this is one of the basic problems, I think, in modern economics, namely that so many colleges teach students that government creates jobs. Government doesn't create jobs. It just doesn't. So we're going to tell people about it, is what Chris Taylor, the Democrat Campaign Committee spokesman, said, and keep at the hard work of governing. House Republicans will have to explain why they continue to peddle conspiracies that threaten to prolong this pandemic. Jeez. The Democrat Senatorial Campaign Committee voiced a similar sentiment while blasting Republicans for pushing the interests of big corporations and the ultra-wealthy at the expense of working families. Senate Democrats, quote, have a strong record of accomplishment delivering millions of vaccines, cutting taxes for American families, and passing a bipartisan infrastructure law that grows good-paying jobs, the Democrat Senate Campaign Committee spokesman Jasmine Vargas said in a statement. Democrats also point to the party's track record on the coronavirus pandemic as the country grapples with the new Omicron variant. Quote, we're going to be talking about how Democrats delivered an effective vaccine distribution, said one Democrat strategist. Yeah. So Democrats delivered a really effective vaccine distribution. Yeah. That's why things are closing for the vaccinated as well as for the unvaccinated. There's a lot of developments that can happen in the next couple of months with this Build Back Broke stuff, the Democrat strategist said. The record that we have hasn't changed, and Republican opposition to these very popular proposals haven't changed either. Well, here's the problem. If you're a Democrat and you're running on these particular programs that you have passed, as well as the ones that have yet to pass, then you have this issue of Republicans saying, yeah, you may have passed some of them, but now we have inflation through the roof. And so the polls for these other programs go way down. You know, the approval ratings go way down when the American people realize that they were inflationary, that they've actually caused inflation. Democrats at the state and national levels have been busy touting the infrastructure package. The Democrat National Committee announced on Tuesday it is rolling out billboards in Texas, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Nevada to tout it. Meanwhile, the Democrat Party of Georgia hosted a press conference highlighting the infrastructure package. And in North Carolina, the state's Democrat Party released a statement highlighting that the infrastructure legislation will provide North Carolina's airports with $458 million over the next 5 years. However, Republicans argue that the difficulties passing Build Back Broke through both chambers will negatively impact Democrats with voters. They were kind of in a position where they were damned if they did, damned if they didn't, said one national Republican strategist. Their base is going to be depressed because they didn't pass their multi-trillion spending boondoggle, the strategist said. They ended up doing the worst of both worlds by passing it through the House and putting their members on the record supporting the unpopular aspects of that bill, then actually not getting it done. Polling paints a mixed picture of the public's attitude on Build Back Broke. A Morning Consult political poll released earlier this month found that 47% of voters said they supported the bill, while 40% said they opposed it. However, the same poll found that respondents supported a number of measures inside the bill, like the child tax credit and expanded health care access. I love it. Expanded health care access. Sure, right. Like, do you really believe that? Do the American people really believe at this particular point in the pandemic that we need more government control of our health care? You need more healthcare access. Yeah, that's the problem. You need more access. You guys can't even manage a pandemic. Why would we want you to manage our healthcare and have a one-payer system, which is what all this is heading towards if we're not there already? Despite Manchin's declaration on Sunday that he wouldn't support Build Back Broke, Democrats insist that the bill is in no way dead. That's what I love when they say this. Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, Democrat of New York, wrote in a Dear Colleague letter on Monday that the upper chamber will consider Build Back Broke very early in the new year so that every member of this body has the opportunity to make their position known on the Senate floor, not just on television. We simply cannot give up. We must, and we will keep fighting to deliver for working families, he wrote. Political discourse on Monday was dominated by the Democratic finger-pointing, with various members of the party taking aim at Manchin. So there you go, infighting. Democrat operatives warned that the average American voter is not as concerned about the inside Washington mechanics of getting the legislation. So you have this fighting between the Democrats, and they're fighting not because inflation is through the roof. Democrats are not fighting with one another because gasoline is more expensive than almost ever. They're not fighting with one another because of the fact that we have a border that is pretty much non-existent. No, they're not fighting over any of those things. They're not even fighting over the fact that they're trying to weaponize the IRS with 87,000 new agents. Nope. They're actually fighting with each other because they want more of all of that. And they haven't been able to get it with Build Back Broke or with their House, I think it's H.R. 1, which is the bill that is the voting rights legislation. So they're rattled, not because your life is worse off. No, they're not rattled because of that. They're rattled because they can't get more stuff passed to make your life even worse than it already is. And that's what is so fascinating about this podcast, listeners, because you would think you would look at the polling and say, you guys are in big trouble, Democrats. You're going to lose big next year if all things remain equal. And they're like, well, hey, we think the reason we're going to lose big is because we can't pass more bad stuff. If we just pass more of it, then we'll win. Then people will be motivated because they actually believe that there are enough people in the United States, the Democrats believe this, that there are enough people in the United States that want to march as fast as possible, if not sprint towards socialism, where there's complete government control of every aspect of the economy, and there no longer really is a free market, and you no longer have free choice about anything. And they really believe, the Democrats really believe that that's where the American people are, or at a minimum, the Democrats want to take us there, in which case it's too late if we actually get to that point. There's no coming back. I mean, the only way to get back from that point is to have a complete collapse of the country, and that is not an option that we want to have, of course. So next up, podcast listeners, do you remember the driver Brandon? Well, Let's Go America and Daily Wire. Let's Go America. Brandon Brown, the driver, NASCAR driver, finally speaks out on the viral Let's Go Brandon meme. Brandon Brown, so he's been quiet so far up to this point about that. Meanwhile, of course, his name is yelled across stadiums across the country It's plastered on t-shirts and sweaters. It's just crazy. I mean, and it's not as though he asked for this. It just kind of happened because of the stupidity of that one reporter, as you recall, who was saying in the background to Brandon, or she was saying to Brandon while people were yelling, blank Joe Biden. And she's like, "Wasn't that great, Brandon? You just won NASCAR and you won Talladega." And they're actually saying, "Let's go, Brandon." Right after that, of course, you heard the crowd chant, blank Joe Biden. So that's how all this started. And then the rest of the country has picked this up. Well, Brandon Brown, the NASCAR driver behind the Let's Go Brandon sensation, has finally broken his silence and is speaking out in a new op-ed. In the Newsweek article released on Monday entitled, "My Name is Brandon," the popular race car driver chose to address the controversy involving his namesake. And he said, "Read my thoughts in Newsweek. Quote, I am fully aware that millions of Americans chanting my name know little about me or about my winning the Talladega race that day. But I have spent the last few weeks getting to know more about them, and I'd like to share a little more about myself," Brown wrote. Brown noted he is not strongly political, has no intention of telling people how to vote in elections. Quote, "I have no interest in leading some political fight. I race cars. I'm not going to endorse anyone, and I'm certainly not going to tell anyone how to vote," he said. "But I'm also no longer going to be silent about the situation I find myself in and why millions of Americans are chanting my name. I hear them even if Washington does not," Brown added. That's kind of interesting. Despite the declaration, Brown expressed that he will not hesitate to speak on important issues during the upcoming racing session. Quote, 99% of my time this upcoming NASCAR season will be spent trying to take the next lap a little faster. But when I have the opportunity and time, I'm not going to hesitate to speak about issues that I am passionate about or the problems we face together as Americans, Brown said. How you vote is none of my business. Instead, I will use what free time I have to highlight the struggle we all feel and share as Americans. To my fans, to NASCAR fans, and to everyone who has chanted my name, I dedicate myself this upcoming season to compete hard on the racetrack and to spotlight issues that are important to me and to millions of Americans across the country, he wrote. Brown continued his article with a rephrasing of the viral phrase that included his name, ending with, "Let's go, America." Pretty good, huh? Kind of interesting. Good for him. I strongly suspect, podcast listeners, that Brandon Brown has received a lot of advice from experts, consultants. I mean, there's a whole industry out there that provides all kinds of advice to celebrities on how to comport themselves in public so that it helps them. And I think he probably did a good thing here. He probably decided to embrace the "Let's Go Brandon" chant. I'm sure that's what he's doing. But at the same time, I think he's realizing that maybe there's an opportunity to capitalize on this. Because let's face it, most NASCAR viewers are conservatives. So he has to be very careful, of course, how he is calling this, because any reasonable person who's in NASCAR is going to not want to scare away his fans. And also, he's a household name because of the blank Joe Biden and the stupid thing that the reporter did, which is to try to, I still think the reporter was trying to cover it up. I'm convinced. I don't think any reporter's that stupid, other than Lubin Tubin. But otherwise, I think they're all, they all do this on purpose. They all lie on purpose. But in any event, good for you, Brandon Brown, for embracing this and for trying to change it to "Let's Go America." I think that's great. Although, quite frankly, you're still going to hear "Let's Go Brandon" at all the games that are out there. I'm convinced they're not going to change. Just too much fun. So next up, podcast listeners, the new governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, has an education secretary that he picked Remember, that's why he got elected. He got elected over the crazy stuff being taught in Virginia's K-12 education, and he got elected because of the crazy school boards that were allowing it to happen. Well, Youngkin, the new governor of Virginia, has chosen an education secretary that founded an organization that calls for collecting children's data and raked in nearly $26 million, that organization did, and that secretary did, from Bill Gates. Now, there's an interesting backstory to this, podcast listeners, because before I read this article, and the article is in the Daily Caller, I want to tell you something interesting, and that is in the Maryland General Assembly, we have a bill every single session that continues to expand the collection of data of children in K-12. And by collection of data, I'm not just talking about their grades, their social security numbers. I'm not just talking about their address. I'm not just talking about those kind of basic ID information items that might be helpful. No, they're collecting mental health information, and they're updating it on a regular basis. They're collecting personal health information. They are collecting any kind of behavioral issues that you've had in the class, or any kind of issues that you've had with respect that required any kind of, principal or vice principal intervention because, you acted out or something like that. All of these things are collected. They also collect all kinds of other information about the papers that you do, the kinds of papers that you submit in class. And I'm not saying that they're scanning those and just putting them there, but they're entering information about you, and they're keeping it essentially forever. And the question is, do you want all of this information? Oh yeah, they're also collecting information about your sexuality. I mean, remember, it's K-12. What the hell does that have to do with anything? Nothing. I mean, they're collecting all this information. And so this is in Maryland. In every single legislative session, those bills pass, so they keep expanding the amount of data that they want to collect. So they keep asking the legislature for more permission and additional permission to collect even more information about your kids. And so then at some point, you do have to ask yourself the question, why is that okay? I mean, isn't it just supposed to be that basic information? Name, address, social security number, grades. I think that's kind of enough. But they're collecting everything. And so in the Daily Caller, Republican governor-elect Glenn Youngkin, he chose a Secretary of Education who founded an organization that advocates for the collection of children's data. It also raked in, the organization did, nearly $26 million in funding from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, according to records from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation reviewed by the Daily Caller. Youngkin tapped Amy Rogstad Guidera, president of Guidera Strategy, on Monday. Between 2005 and 2018, Guidera was the founder and chief executive of Data Quality Campaign, DQC, a national organization that advocates for the collection of data on American school children. DQC encourages states to create unique identifiers for each student, such as a student ID number, to anonymously track student data on a statewide level, according to the company's 2006 10-step plan. The organization calls for states to use data, such as students' grades, class schedules, and more, to create reports used to influence state and federal policy. States are already mandated to publish report cards that provide parents and the public with general information about in-state and district school performance and progress, per the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. DQC now calls for students' data to be used to foster equitable education outcomes, according to their Data for Equity project page. The organization also promoted a federal data collection project that measures the nation's progress towards equity goals. DQC also recommended that school leadership and state governing and advisory boards make staffing decisions that are representative of the racial or gender breakdown of a given community. The push for equity via student data began after Guidera's 2018 exit, according to a timeline review of DQC's website. Between 2014 and 2016, DQC's legislative agendas were focused on protecting student privacy. According to the organization's 2014, 2015, and 2016 legislative breakdown. Under Guidera's leadership, the organization also promoted and passed legislation that provided parents the ability to opt their child out of data collection to third-party service providers. In 2017, while Guidera remained at the helm, DQC supported policy that helped school districts subvert student privacy rules. According to DQC's year-end review, the organization supported 2 amendments in Connecticut that would have subverted a public school district from implementing Public Act 1618, which adds a layer of requirements to ensure student privacy. DQC also supported a Maryland commission on restorative practices and ending the school-to-prison pipeline in 2017. Parents in Loudoun County, Virginia, were concerned about issues of student privacy and data collection before Youngkin's election. According to a Loudoun County Concerned Parent organization, Second Step Programming, which is inspired by critical race theory, allegedly collects data from the Loudoun County public school students, according to the district's contract with a vendor reviewed by the Daily Caller. Organizations pushing back against critical race theory-inspired training appear increasingly concerned that their children's data is being collected by organizations such as Second Step that promote controversial ideologies. DQC claims that it does more than just adhere to data privacy and security laws. It vows to create a culture in which data is trusted and used ethically to support individuals. Podcast listeners, do any of you believe that? You shouldn't, okay? Because while this story is about Virginia, they did mention Maryland, and I'm in Maryland, and this kind of stuff is happening in many states across the country, no doubt California as well, but probably maybe even your state, your Republican state, potentially. And in Maryland, we have put in, and by the way, by me, I've put in amendments to amend this data collection law so that parents are first notified what data is collected, and second, giving parents the right to opt out. And another way of doing it, of course, is just say you would have to opt in. Otherwise, we're not going to do it. But each time those bills, those amendments are defeated. And it's pretty fascinating, too, because the Democrats love collecting this data and they say, well, you don't understand. What the bill really does is it protects privacy. It protects privacy. It makes us safer. That's what the bill really does, because it disaggregates the data from the individual, so you never really know what the individual's data really is. Do you really believe that for 1 minute, podcast listeners? Do you believe for 1 minute that if someone wants to find out what you were like in K-12 and what you did and all of the stuff about you that they're collecting, which is really super personal stuff, probably even your DNA, for God's sakes, do you think for 1 minute that they're not going to be able to get the data back to where it started to find out what your data is and how it's related to you? Of course they can. That's the whole purpose of this. It's a shell game. The data is disaggregated. We'll never know who the person is that the data is connected to. Right. And once again, it goes to who owns the children. Do the parents own the children? Do they belong to the parents, which means ownership? Or Does the state own the children? Do the children belong to the state? Democrats believe children belong to the state. Unfortunately, here's a governor, Governor Youngkin, who literally ran as a Republican and said he was going to stop this nonsense, and yet he's made a pretty big error in having this person be the Secretary of Education, if that sticks, by the way, because she presumably would have to be confirmed in the Virginia legislature. And he could also change his mind. And he's not yet the governor. He's the governor-elect. So DQC received a bulk of its funding from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation between the educational organization's founding to present day. Between 2005 and 2021, the Gates Foundation shelled out $25 million plus in committed funds to DQC, according to the foundation's website. The first round of funding, $750,000, was issued to the National Center for Education Achievement, not directly to DQC. However, the grantee website listed under the National Center for Education Achievement links DQC's website. Links to DQC's website, The Gates Foundation committed $18 million plus during Guidera's leadership. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funds a slew of progressive education programs, including the Pathway to Equitable Math Instruction book. What the heck is that? That's where 1 + 1 = 3, which tells educators that asking students to show their work or find the right answer in math class is racist. Can you imagine an organization run by, of all people, Bill Gates and Melinda Gates? You know, two very, very bright people would try to push a program called Pathway to Equitable Math Instruction, which tells educators that asking students to show their work or find the right answer in math is racist. Other funders to DQC include Bloomberg Philanthropies, no surprise there, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, AT&T, ExxonMobil, and Ford Foundation, and Target Corporation, among others. The Youngkin team highlighted Guidera's accomplishments and GOP priorities, most notably in restoring expectations of excellence, increasing charter schools, and implementing curriculum that removes politics from the classroom. Guidera's DQC-supported legislation aimed at increasing funding for charter schools. So there's also a tweet where Youngkin announces, "Today I'm announcing Amy Rogstad Guidera as your next Secretary of Education of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Amy understands that parents matter and will go to work on day one to restore excellence in our education system by putting your children first." Okay, Glenn Youngkin, then maybe the first thing you should do is pass a law in the Virginia legislature, the first thing, that prohibits the collection of data of parents' children in Virginia's public schools unless the parents opt in. So ending that collection of data right away. You'd have to actually opt in. That would be the first thing. The second thing you should do is to have a bill that passes right after that that prohibits, just like they did in Florida, prohibits CRT from being taught in public schools and prohibits the CRT and the use of the word equity to be taught in public schools. Because equity is not a term that should be taught. Okay? I mean, it's certainly not in K-12 as the standard. And by that, let me make very clear what I mean, right? It's children, you have this test in front of you. If you study for this test, we're going to grade the test. And then after you get your grades, we're going to work on all the things that we think that you need to work on based on the outcome of the tests. Okay? But at the end of the day, you're still going to be graded on the tests. Equity is, children, everybody's going to pass this test. No matter how much work you put into it, doesn't really matter. Doesn't even matter how many questions you get right or wrong. Everyone's going to get the same grade. It's pass-fail. Everything's pass-fail now. That's a problem. That's a real problem. So Youngkin needs to end that and maybe pass some sort of merit act to bring merit back to the public school system. So Youngkin spokesman Devin O'Malley told the Daily Caller that Guidera believes in protecting students' privacy and leveraging data to empower parents, increase transparency, and drive accountability in the education system. As a member of Governor-elect Youngkin's cabinet, Amy understands that parents matter and that we must raise standards, restore excellence in education, oversee a record education budget, increase the number of innovation labs and charter schools, and stand for a curriculum that prepares Virginia's children for a successful future, O'Malley said. So, podcast listeners, I must tell you that this is concerning, and it's concerning for all the right reasons, and hopefully the citizens of Virginia will hold Youngkin accountable. They will hold him accountable by finding out more information about Ms. Guidera and exactly what it is that she believes, and just ask the questions directly to her. Do you support collecting data on children? And if so, what data? And do you believe that parents should have the right to opt out? Yes or no? Very simple. Do you believe in CRT? Do you believe in equity? Yes or no? And then maybe even ask her to define them. Do you believe in having a required course from K to 12, not just 1 year, all 12 years, on social studies that actually teaches about the American experiment, among other things? Yes or no? And I think that's really kind of important stuff. And you know what's funny is when you really think about it, we really never have an opportunity as parents to ever really ask those questions. Like, it's just like, this doesn't happen. We never really have that opportunity to really ask. And it just shows you that we're really not in control anymore. That these big educational monopolies are literally growing amongst themselves without any kind of check and balance whatsoever. And it just seems like no matter who you elect, that never changes. And it's not going to change until we actually blow up the monopoly. We end the monopoly. And we end the monopoly, as we all know, by school choice. That's obvious. But we end the monopoly by just basically passing a very simple bill that says from this point forward, every child gets $20,000 to go to K to 12, and they get to go anywhere they want to go. Problem solved. Pretty simple. There goes the monopoly. Now you're a shopper. Just like you shop for electronics. You want the best electronics you can get, the best cell phone you can get, the best computer you can get. You're going to certainly do the same thing with public education or private education with that money, wherever you take it. Namely, you're going to shop for the best education available to everyone. So there are a ton of comments in this article, and they're really worth reading, and this article is really worth reading as well. And I got to tell you, I'm not throwing the towel in on Youngkin yet. I'm not, and we shouldn't, because I just think we need more answers from this pick. And I can only hope that this story is not true. I mean, I can only hope that it's not true. But if it is, then Youngkin is a lame duck before he's even started. And he has time. He has time to replace her. They're, a smart governor that just got elected in this way by moms from the suburbs would be calling the governor of Florida and asking for advice first. That's what a smart new governor of Virginia would do. I can't imagine that he's done that with this pick. So next up, podcast listeners, a top Harvard professor found guilty of lying about payments from China. So we have talked about this before. The difference is now this guy has been found guilty. A prominent Harvard professor was found guilty Tuesday of lying about his ties to China, the Wall Street Journal reported. Charles Lieber, a scientist in Harvard University's chemistry and engineering departments, was found guilty on 6 counts of lying related to his work at the Wuhan University of Technology, the Wall Street Journal reported. Lieber was first arrested by federal authorities in January of 2020 and charged with making false statements regarding his participation in the 1,000 Talents Plan, a Chinese recruitment program that aims to foster foreign academic talent. The Department of Justice alleged that Lieber was paid by the Wuhan University of Technology $50,000 per month, living expenses of up to $1 million Chinese yuan, which is approximately $158,000, and awarded him with a $1.5 million to establish a research lab, like a grant to establish a research lab at Wuhan University of Technology, which is Woot. I don't know. I think that's funny. Under federal law, Lieber was obliged to disclose the financial relationship according to the DOJ. The agency alleged Lieber concealed the payments from Woot on his tax returns and lied to federal investigators about the extent of the relationship. The jury but there you go right there. So he literally didn't even put the information on his federal tax returns because he knew it was illegal. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. That's pretty fast, the WSJ reported, before finding Lieber guilty on all 6 counts. Following his arrest, Lieber sued Harvard University, alleging the institution was obligated to cover his legal fees. He didn't sue him because he thought they did something wrong. He sued them because it's like, well, I'm a crook, but you should have paid my legal fees. What a loser. The professor's arrest was part of the DOJ's China Initiative, a counter-espionage program begun during the Trump administration that focuses on identifying and prosecuting those engaged in trade secret theft, hacking, and economic espionage. Well, there you go, podcast listeners. No matter what your opinion is of Donald Trump, there's no doubt in my mind that he pivoted the United States away from Russia and towards China. That is to say, Donald Trump pivoted the U.S. away from looking at Russia and the Middle East as potential flashpoints in the world economy and with potential war, and instead focused the country's attention on our biggest rival, China. Okay, so that is a really good thing, because when you hear all the experts talk now, the experts in the military and the experts in economics, you hear things from the folks in the military saying, China is actually a little bit ahead of us with technology. And then you hear people in the private sector on the private economics side say, they're going to surpass our economy and maybe eventually be 3 times the size of our economy. So up to Trump, up until his election, that conversation never occurred. In fact, it was Republicans and Democrats alike who were too busy selling out the United States of America. So like him or not, he did do that. So the professor's arrest was part of that DOJ's China Initiative, a counter-espionage program that began during the Trump administration that focuses on identifying and prosecuting those engaged in trade secret theft, hacking, and economic espionage. The initiative has drawn criticism from many in the academic community, including a group of over 100 Stanford professors and faculty who asked the DOJ to discontinue the program, citing racial bias and a chilling effect the initiative allegedly has on academic freedom. Harvard University did not immediately respond to the Daily Caller News Foundation request for comment. So here's what's funny and strange at the same time. 100 Stanford University faculty who asked the DOJ, Department of Justice, to stop this program because of racial bias, and it has a chilling effect on academic freedom. Well, folks, do you know where the digital revolution started? It started in Silicon Valley, literally where Stanford is located, and it is Stanford that was the brainchild, the brains trust of Silicon Valley. It educated all of these people who then created what is known as Silicon Valley. So why would Stanford then be looking to China for leadership? Stanford is the leader. Why would they be? It demonstrates to you how far China has infiltrated our academic institutions. And I think it's actually probably far worse than what we think. and also demonstrates to you the fact that when you govern and where the rubber meets the road is when you have a president of the United States who's just willing to do the tough thing. And that tough thing is actually saying, you know what, Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people, the Chinese Communist Party is probably not our friend. They're probably not our friend. Maybe we actually may want to, I don't know, start looking at them as a competitor and stop transferring technology to them and stop allowing them to steal our technology or to just buy people and buy academics and then just become the world hub for technology because we were sitting by because we're afraid of being called racist. You're not racist, podcast listeners, if you're competing against the CCP, a communist party which has no morals, no ethics. All they know is power, pure exercise of power. That's all they know. So this demonstrates to you how smart the Chinese are because they're able to infiltrate our academics by saying things like equity and CRT and, you got to treat us the same way you treat everybody else because we're the Chinese Communist Party. And just because, we look different from you doesn't mean that we shouldn't trust us. And just to be clear, podcast listeners, so don't get in trouble, I'm talking about the CCP. I'm not talking about the Chinese people because I'm pretty sure the Chinese people, for the most part, would love to get rid of the CCP if they could. Unfortunately, that's not happening anytime soon. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America. And it is banning health insurance for the unvaccinated. You heard that correctly. Banning health insurance for the unvaccinated. Assemblyman Patrick Burke, a Democrat from Buffalo, New York. Of course, he's a Democrat. They're all about banning. He's proposing a bill to allow insurance companies to deny COVID treatment coverage for the unvaccinated. Okay. So, WKBW in Buffalo, New York, is reporting New York State Assemblyman Patrick Burke, who's a Democrat from Buffalo, New York, is proposing legislation that would give health insurance companies the option to deny coverage for any COVID-related treatments. I know we're all tired of this pandemic, and it's largely being perpetrated by variants of COVID that keep sprouting up, and they're mostly sprouting up in unvaccinated populations, said Assemblyman Burke. So this dude is actually trying to put this bill in. Mark Molinaro tweeted out, "This is cruel. I chose to be vaccinated and encourage others to do the same. Giving providers more power to deny coverage is wrong. Denying coverage to those choices you disagree with isn't progressive. It's just wrong." And plenty of others too. Well, you know what? We actually have a clip of this tool, Assemblyman Patrick Burke of the state of New York from Buffalo, and we have him talking about his bill. We have that clip, and here it is.
Freedom isn't free, according to New York State Assembly member Patrick Burke.
They have the freedom to not get vaccinated, to increase the likelihood of spreading a very dangerous disease. Then I don't know if the insurance pool and the rest of us should be covering for their very, very bad decisions that are already hurting us in a different way. So that's the thought behind the bill.
Burke's bill would let insurance companies deny COVID-related coverage to people who refuse the COVID-19 vaccine.
So you heard it. I mean, it's a real thing that you just heard. This guy who's elected by the people wants to use government's control of your health care as a weapon. And folks, how many times have we warned the American people that that's exactly what Obamacare would do? It would enable the government to say, You only have one healthcare insurance company, and that is the government. And since the government is paying for your healthcare because that's the only insurance company that you have, then government can weaponize that healthcare insurance and healthcare agency by denying you care. That's what happens when you don't have competition. How is this any different from government-run public schools and you having only one choice of schools, right? Because you can't afford private school. You're paying all these taxes to the state. You don't have school choice because the money doesn't follow the student. So you have a monopoly in government schools, and you're stuck with this substandard education in many jurisdictions across the country. How is this any different than government-run healthcare, which causes you to be stuck with a one-size-fits-all, substandard healthcare program that now can weaponize itself by saying, you chose to be unvaccinated, and since you are unvaccinated, you are a super spreader, which, by the way, podcast listeners, according to NIH and CDC, actually, if you've had COVID, that actually isn't true. The spreaders are the people that have been vaccinated, not the people that have already had COVID and are unvaccinated. Okay? I'm not a doctor, but I read the same article that you guys have read, and we've had Dr. Jim Small on this show, and we've talked about this very same thing. Namely, that we have elected officials that are so drunk with power, like this Patrick Burke, that they now think that every aspect of government can and should be weaponized. As I said, and as I've said so many times, we've warned you that when you don't have competition in healthcare, when you don't have a choice of different doctors and different practices to go to, that you're going to be stuck with one substandard choice. It's exactly like going down the aisle of your local grocery store and, you're really into candy, and you walk down the aisle and it is 40 feet long with the exact same kind of candy only. Every single shelf. There's like no other choice. How much fun would that be? And let's say it's the candy that you don't even like, and that's the only candy you're allowed to eat because the government says so. And that's where we are now with COVID. We have Democrats that are drunk with power, like Assemblyman Patrick Burke. They don't even know, I think, about what they're trying to accomplish and how dangerous it is. And how many times have you podcast listeners said to your neighbor, hey, look, I have a family member that has to have a procedure done, and the procedure requires, some operation on their knee, like a knee replacement, as an example, and you want a referral to a doctor, a good doctor. How many times have you asked for referrals for a good doctor? People do it all the time. And the older you get, the more you ask for referrals because the more healthcare you need. Well, according to Assemblyman Patrick Burke, you really shouldn't be able to do that. No, because the government's going to control your healthcare, and there will be a one-size-fits-all. You just get the same crappy doctors all the time. There's no competition. You have no opportunity to advance as a society because no one's competing against one another to try to make treatments better and better and better and more efficient and to try to extend life. And that is the problem. It's one of the reasons we do the dumbest bill in America, because just because you're an elected official and you can put in a bill doesn't mean that you should. Less bills are better. Less laws are better. More freedom is good. And banning bills are typically really bad ideas. Especially when you're talking about health insurance and denying people health insurance for the unvaccinated. Oh my gosh. Next thing you know, we're going to deny health insurance for Republicans. I mean, why not, right? It's really kind of, or if you have more people skewed who are unvaccinated who happen to be black, we're going to deny health insurance for mostly black people because they're unvaccinated. And I don't know if that's still the truth or not, or still the case, but it underscores what this guy is doing. And it's just really stupid. And that's the dumbest bill in America, banning health insurance for the unvaccinated. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. Merry Christmas. See you next time.